In past years, it's been popular to think of the imagination as something that an individual possesses. Well, if that's true, how is it that more than one people imagines the same thing at roughly the same time? The answer is really something that ties all of us together. The imagination is a network that is independent of space and independent of time. The collection here at the Museum of Synthesizer Technology is a way of understanding this network. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't prove that it exists other than by what comes out of people's heads. What you see down there are solid manifestations of people exercising their imaginations, of picking information off this network. The collection here is certainly the largest, the most significant, and the most complete collection of electronic musical instruments in the world. The museum is now open. Welcome and enjoy.
Foot tape on each key, on each keyboard, retained on the strings at the back. So when you play, you get a trumpet which will run the duration. It'll run for 8 seconds.
Well, this is the man behind this incredible place, Mr. Martin Nukem. And I think we really ought to discover, Martin, how on earth, why on earth, when on earth did you come up with this amazing notion? How did you...
Well, I think the actual notion of having a museum started possibly about, just after Christmas of this year. So we're only talking about, say, 5 or 6 months ago. The collection that I had got too big, and there were so many people wanting to actually come along and have a look. Right. That I decided, well, thinking commercially instead of having a look for nothing.
Right.
And there must be a way of making some money out of this as well, to be quite honest.
They didn't have any reverb on it, and it was slightly detuned.
question is really, did you ever, in your wildest dreams, when you were starting to build these instruments years and years ago, think that this is what it would come to?
No, in fact, we didn't think much of anything. Everything we did for fun of it.
Yeah.
Had no idea where it would go.
Right, because obviously your pioneering work in this has produced this whole field of music. Do you think that the fun is still there for people, or?
Yeah, it's different now. Back then you could do hardware on the kitchen table. Now it's much harder, but you can do software on the kitchen table.
Right.
But back then, in the late 60s, this sort of equipment was not even considered musical instrument. It was considered professional audio equipment that you would use in a studio.
What made you change? What made you think, hang on a minute, there's an instrument here, not just a piece of audio equipment?
Well, it was the musicians who thought about it. No one in particular at that time. There were several dozen, maybe 100 musicians who said, you know, we really like something that we can carry around and play on the gig. I said, play? You know, this is studio equipment. No, we want something, you know, it's got a keyboard. We want something that we can set up and do a 3-hour session with and walk out with.
Right.
That was the beginning of the Memorymoog. And once we designed the Memorymoog, we decided to try and show it at the Music Merchants Convention. That was a bit strange for those music merchants back then. None of them thought that stuff like this with knobs and patch chords and words like oscillator and envelope, you know, would sell to musicians. I mean, they didn't understand it. How could the musicians understand it? But the musicians understood it right fast, and from that the music merchants learned.
Walter Carlos and Switched On Bach obviously was a very, very important moment in your and Synthesizer's
It certainly was.
career. I've always had a feeling, in a way, that because of his incredible musicianship, he planted the seed in people's minds that the synthesizers in that time, in the mid-60s, could do far more than they actually could do. Were you aware of this? When Switched On Bach came out and the reception it got, did you think, oh my God, you know, now I've got to build what people think I've already built, or what was your reaction?
That's not exactly the way we thought about it. We recognized that Carlos had a unique talent, and the music that came out was a result of his unique talent, and the instrument was just a tool for manifesting that talent. Other musicians had talents too, but in different directions. What happened in the 60s, 69, and 70s is that a lot of other music producers figured, well, Carlos was successful, and Carlos used a synthesizer. Therefore, the synthesizer is the gimmick. And if I get a synthesizer too, I can be as successful as Carlos. You'd be surprised how many music producers thought that. How many records were put out in the late 60s, Moog this, Moog that. And most of them flopped because the talent wasn't there, the vision wasn't there, and just the chops, the knowledge of how to use a system like that wasn't there.
How did musicians respond to this baby over here? This is,
well,
were they completely confused by it, or what?
Every musician responded differently.
Yeah.
Someone like Carlos would look at this and immediately understand what to do. His hands would be going and turning the knobs even before he touched them. Other musicians would go like this, and they'd freeze, you know, they'd freak out. And then there were all kinds of musicians in between that were intimidated at first, but they dug in. But what you find in general is that every knob on this has some musical meaning. You begin to think of changing sounds. Here's a sound, and a knob like this now would turn up vibrato. Now that's something you can hear. You don't have to study an engineering book to hear that. This knob here would change the speed of the vibrato. This whole device you think of as a device that creates a vibrato. It happens to be called a modulating oscillator. Modulation means to vary rapidly. Here's a device called a filter. This is a device that lets through certain harmonics and cuts out others. And if I were to open the filter a little bit, you can hear more and more of the harmonics. So this knob, too, has an effect on the sound that is 100% musical. And you just get to know what that knob does, and after a short time, you begin to reach for it instinctively.
Our first customers were experimental musicians in universities and in private studios. The next group of musicians to adopt the use of a system like this were the commercial music producers. And what they found was that they could, for the first time, they could take a sound and tailor it anywhere in the spectrum, from a completely conventional sound that sounded like a violin to something completely freaky or anywhere in between. You know, they could impart just the right degree of humor or strangeness or familiarity to it.
What year would this have been built?
This looks like several years. It could have been as early as 1967 and as late as 1977.
So you would have actually built part of this?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, over on the east coast of America, Bob Moog was always trying to make the synthesizer more of a musician's tool. On the west coast of America, a guy named Don Buchler had scant regard for such things, and he was quite happy producing a succession of supremely impractical but wonderful instruments like this.
It's everything you touch, you know. I can close my eyes and make sounds that are completely unique to this instrument, you know. So I think you don't need a technical basis to look at these. Also, the operation is, you know, all 10 fingers, no eyes, no problem, you know. It's sort of, something's going to happen, you know. If I stand here for long enough, I know that I'm going to find something that's going to turn me on. Everything is done through patch cords, much less modular system, so you can route these things to anywhere. That also means you can route them to all the places that they were designed to be routed to, and also the ones that they weren't, which often makes an interesting result. So starting from the left, then we have the preamplifier ring modulator, which is again, inputs everywhere. There's inputs for patching stuff in. You can put vocals in here if you want, or use the 2 oscillators. Sounds quite nice if you put a shortwave radio through here, actually, and start fooling. Then we've got the 3 oscillators, the sound sources. Lovely range of stuff, switchable. They've also made things where stuff is patched in already, so you don't have to use patch cords. Basic things like sample and hold, kind of... or the old envelopes. Oh, that's a nice birdie noise, isn't it? And then modulation by other oscillators. Again, you can patch stuff around, you can start creating loops, all sorts of horrible things happen then. Then you've got the sort of mixing stage going through the filter. Again, lots of stuff to plug in. 2 envelopes, VCA output, again, very nice, lots of chances to mix things, ring modulator. And this stuff down here, which although I've had it for 8 years, still has me foxed. But it does some strange things with the actual voltages. And of course, the loudspeakers, nice sample and hold section, white noise like it should be, with the old thunderous one, and the old thin one, very nice, white and low frequency. It's amazing how this is interfaced with equipment that's today, you know, just a bit of common sense. External clock inputs, so easy to plug up. You can trigger the sample and hold rates. You can trigger whatever you like, really. And all in all, rather wonderful.
Let me get this straight. A thing that looks like a police box standing in a junkyard, it can move anywhere in time and space?
I can see by your face that you're not certain. You don't understand. I knew you wouldn't. Never mind. Now, which switch was this? No.
Yeah.
America, with ARP, Moog and Buckler, didn't have the monopoly on synthesizers in the 1960s. Here in Britain, it was Pete Zinoviev's EMS, whose modules contributed extensively to the famous Doctor Who soundtracks. And perhaps EMS's crowning glory was the Synthy 100, produced in 1974.
I came into this, first, as anyone who ever saw this beast, from dreaming of it. This is the oscilloscope we find here. There's a frequency meter. We got the sequencer there, the display of the memory. We got 4 low-pass filters, 4 high-pass filters. We got 12 oscillators, which I think 8 are mainly for audio purposes, and 4 are for modulation. We got an octave filter bank, we got ring modulators. If you still want to use it today, the sequencer with its 256 events doesn't make any sense at all. You just can leave this away. You don't need the keyboard because you can MIDI-fy the thing and control it by a MIDI keyboard. And these oscillators, they aren't stable at all, and they're drifting just the way they like. So the most interesting thing to my mind is the octave filter bank, the ring modulators, and all these modulation facilities you got in here. The thing is, you can connect everything in here with anything you like. All these parts of it are interchangeable, and you do this by just putting one of those pins here and one of the holes there. And you see it's a lot of holes here. I don't know how many, it's about 9,600. It's a lot of searching when you program it. It's just really great for making noises, bizarre noises of any kind.
Until the mid-1970s, the synthesizer was monophonic. You could play one note at a time, and that was that. The Holy Grail was polyphony, 2 voices, 4 voices, 8 voices even. And what made polyphony feasible was the use of microprocessors, computer chips. Phil Collins used one of the earliest polyphonics, the American Prophet 5, for the pad sound on this track.
Oh Lord, oh Lord.
Meanwhile, the Japanese had also twigged that microprocessors could be harnessed for the musical cause. And soon players from all over the world were breaking their backs, heaving around another monster, the CS80 from the mighty Yamaha.
The great thing about it is that you can actually control like a tone up and down, which you can't hear at the moment because I've got it going posse. Still can't hear it, here we go. So you can put your finger on it somewhere and then use it like which you can't really do on anything else. And just because it's very quick to get into stuff. I think most people use the pitch wheel for sort of more because it wasn't a definite tone, it's quite difficult to get it exactly right. And it also has a strange thing of kind of reverby, echoey type thing, which is very odd, which I'd never heard on any other synth still.
Japan is so often accused of following rather than leading, but there are many exceptions to this rule, and frankly few more endearing ones than the Roland Vocoder Plus, released in 1979.
When you speak into the microphone, the vocoder takes the sound you're sending down into the microphone, namely your voice, and encodes the sound that the keyboard is generating.
Now, that may or may not pick up on the camera's microphone properly. Basically, what it does is it modulates the inbuilt sound with whatever sound you put into the microphone, which in the case of normal usage would be a voice, hence the name vocoder. You can actually vocode with other things as well. I found one of the interesting things you can do, which we're not set up to do right now, is to vocode a sound with itself, which would be to take an already recorded sound off tape, send it into the mic input, and also send it into the external synth input, in which case you would get a slightly unearthly version of the same thing coming out. But it works by a system of filters. There's 10 like graphic filters inside and a sibilant filter, which analyze the harmonic content of your voice. They then copy the VCA movements of that and exactly reproduce it on a second set of graphics applied across the output of the sound that this generates. Now, where this sound gets its original thing is from the strings. It also, because it also functions as a basic string synthesizer. So the normal string sound. It's very rich in harmonics, and that's really what you need to do good vocoding. It's no good taking a fairly muted or sine wavy kind of sound. You need something with as much top end and high harmonic interest as possible. There is a technique involved in this. A lot of people say that vocoders are great for people that can't sing, and it's actually a bit of a myth, because the vocoder will actually respond very differently depending on the note you sing. If I was to just play one note on here and then glissando my voice, assuming the microphone picks up more of the vocoder than me, you should be able to hear the sound of the vocoder changing in its character. It's actually picking up different harmonics. So you can actually highlight, if you're playing chords, you can actually highlight notes within the chord by singing the note you wish to highlight.
So, in the case of that C chord, if you want to highlight that note, you sing the E.
If you want to sing,
highlight the C, you sing the C, and the C comes out all the E, C, E, C, G.
So it actually gives you a lot of control. So being able to sing does definitely help. I can't sing at all, but at least I can hit the note that I want to.
Japan was phenomenally successful at producing synths in the 1980s, but there were odd pockets of resistance. One of the most odd was from a company called Electronic Dream Plant from Oxford in England, which came up with the incredibly silly idea of making an ultra-cheap, almost throwaway monophonic synth, and it was called the Wasp.
You could get great sounds out of them if you connected them to a speaker or an external amplifier, but because they had a built-in speaker, they always sounded terrible, and the name Wasp actually came from the rather thin droning sound you got out of the internal speaker. It was actually quite good for sort of solo type sounds, although, you know, on a traditional synthesizer you'd have a mod wheel here. People soon worked out that they had to go over here to bring the vibrato in and stuff. And the glide was actually quite good as well.
The Japanese, with names like Roland and Korg and Yamaha, dominated the market in the 1980s. But the Americans weren't quite out yet. Moog had one final fling in the heftily unreliable Memorymoog.
It's very strong, very deep. A lot of filters, they are surrounded by the sound. It's a real instrument, so you are it's very expressive, and you can give a lot of different states of minds. It's like a breath. It's like a heart.
I got a mini Moog as well, but this is just like having 6 mini Moogs. So the 18 oscillators all stacked, so it's pretty powerful. It's a sort of kick your head in machine for bass, it really is. You know, you can't get control of it most of the time, but that's pretty good.
The 80s was a period of great change, with new technologies coming in like sampling, digital synthesis, and direct computer control. One system that encompassed many new concepts came from Germany, from PPG.
Classic PPG sound, I think people would recognise first off, would be the wavetable sweep. The instrument is structured in such a way that you have selection of waveforms by these controls here. This is the waves oscillator control, and this is your wave sub, which is like a second oscillator, which you can detune in the standard way against the other, against the original oscillator. But you can also select one out of 64 waveforms for that particular voice. So here we go. What we're hearing now is not sample and hold. We're actually hearing waveform changes, waveforms being selected from the wave table. Now that's not terribly dramatic or useful in that particular mode, but some of the transitions are a lot smoother and can produce some very bell-like sounds. Once you add the wave term on, you've got an audio input, all essential for mic or line level sampling. But also you can create your own waveforms using sine waves or more complex waves as fundamentals, first, second, third harmonics, right through to 32nd harmonic. It's doing a heck of a lot for a 6809 based machine. It's producing 8 voices, and it's also a multi-timbral instrument. If you work in the 2.3 mode, you could call up 8 separate banks and go for split points or maybe layered sounds. So you could have a nice brass and vocal sound to the left, and maybe Hammond and Synthy to the right, and control the individual volumes of those sounds. The nice thing about it is, though it's 8 voice, it's quite intelligent in reassigning sounds to voices, so it's got a decent note robbing facility.
I first came across this beast probably 82, I think, and they were showing the prototype of this, but they had absolutely no sounds for it whatsoever. They shipped one over to me from Halstead. The British distributor was just up the road from here in Halstead, and I sat for a couple of weeks in my room and just did presets for it, which then got sent back to Italy and was shipped as the factory presets. Probably the most famous album that this was ever used on is Rendezvous by Jean-Michel Jarre, and he actually used quite a lot of those factory presets. The one I've got up here at the moment, famous laser harp sequence, which I think everybody's guessed by now is actually rolling on tape while he's holding his hands in the beams, simply because the laser harp could never be relied on to trigger properly. There's lots of other sounds on here that anyone familiar with that album will probably know. One of the wonderful things about the SynthX was it's probably the only polysynth in this room that's got bandpass and high-pass filtering. All the monosynths are bound to have it, but for some reason, most designers, whether it was sequential circuits or Moog, decided for some reason when they made a polysynth, they thought, oh, low-pass filtering will be enough. You can't get a sound like that unless you have a bandpass filter. Jeff Downes used to use one as a substitute for his Prophet 10 and 5 when they died, because it's very similar to program to a Prophet. It has this capability to do the Prophet type sounds, but a lot more. It also had chorus on board, which at the time was regarded as completely unprofessional, because you're supposed to use external chorus units. It meant that you got a much fuller sound. The other thing that was really nice about it was how quick and easy the sequencer was to come up with something. What I'm actually doing here, when I play the note, this button I'm tapping here represents spaces in between, so it was quite easily to play the musical rest that you wanted. Let's just try and find the right sound. Just something simple like that would have taken about an hour to get out of a PPG and Waveterm. So it was, although it was never going to be a sequencer in the way sequencers are now, it was great for throwing together ideas quickly for composition. Somebody else that took to using this a lot, although I don't think he ever actually recorded with it, was Keith Emerson. And one of the reasons he used it was that his GX1 was dying, and this was the only thing that could substitute for fanfare. And also using the sequencer, he could actually get the bass line running as well.
Well, there we have it, the golden age of analog synthesis. What Bob Moog tapped into in the early 60s may only have lasted until the mid-80s. But the spirit of analog synthesis is still being explored and appreciated by musicians. So it's been a wonderful day. Thank
Incredible.
You. Yeah, I think there's a few instruments still working in there. Too many people trashing them. What's the future hold for the museum then?
Well, I think now I just want as many musicians to actually use these facilities as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's set up for recording, not just for the enthusiasts to come down and revel in the wonder that's down there. So I hope that both the recording musician and the enthusiast will come in their hundreds.
Right. So you'd like to establish this as a studio that musicians can know is on the map for...
oh, definitely, because there's lots of instruments down there that aren't going to be easy to get hold of anywhere else, and they're all under one roof.
Yeah.
So I think that in itself will give a certain amount of popularity to this place.
Right. And perhaps a few more performances in years to come?
I think so. On the anniversary of this event, I think it would be a good idea to hold such gatherings after seeing the amount of people that turned up this time and the joy they had. I think it'd be well worth it.
Good. Well, it's been a great day, so maybe I'll just ask you for one more sneak look, I think.
Definitely.
Okay.
Come on then.